Hey everyone, it's Alan over at Cobblers Plus in Denver, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a special video for a gentleman by the name of Simon Kim. Simon, this one's for you. Come join us and check out what we're going to be working on today. The box gives it away a little bit, doesn't it? So let's check it out.
I'm Alan Turshkov. Join us today and enter our world of a cobbler to see the craftsmanship it takes to rebuild and restore footwear and other leather goods, as well as recommendations from our industry.
So, as you can tell, we've got a box here from Alan Edmonds. Yes, there is a pair of Edmonds in here, so don't be saying, oh, there's a different pair of shoes in there. It is a pair of Alan Edmonds. They are from a gentleman by the name of Simon Kim, who's very active in a lot of Facebook groups online. There's Alan Edmond Enthusiast, there's North American Shoe Builders, Waxed and Dyed, as well as a few other ones such as Alden Enthusiast and Vintage Florsheim Enthusiast and Exotic Leather Enthusiast. He's active in a lot of those groups and everything. And this gentleman was actually kind enough to even gift me a couple of pairs of Alan Edmonds he ordered for me. So I really appreciate it, Simon. Some of you may have seen the pictures of them. It was a pair of Alan Edmond Cornwallises in the blue, which I can show you guys a little bit later, and a pair of Park Avenues that were slightly used, but in beautiful shape still. And, you know, he sent out these to me directly from the factory. Well, not the factory, but directly from one of the stores at Alan Edmonds, and he wanted these redone, brand new, at least brand new out of the box like this. Now, these are factory seconds, so in this video we're going to quickly examine and see what kind of issues they may possibly have, considering that these are a factory second. I mean, he got an awesome deal on them, but we'll go through them and we're going to be redoing a lot of stuff on it anyways. So let's start out by unboxing. Ooh, it's an unboxing video. Actually, I unboxed it already, so not quite an unboxing video. But we've got a pair of Strands here. What do you think? Walnut Strands. I like them. I don't know if I wear Strands too often myself, but these ones are a little bit interesting coming out of the box right away. They seem almost like they have a really curved toe area there. Let me double check that. Yeah, it seems like that toe is coming up a little bit more than normal. But I think we should be able to get that. Seems about normal, actually. It just might be playing a trick on my eyes there. But let's go through and see what we have here. Double check all the stitching. The stitching all looks fine. Heels look fine. See the bottom of the sole. Looks fine. I mean, there's a little nick right there, basically. Let's double check all the leather and everything. And the leather does feel like it needs a little bit of love and attention. It's a little bit on the dry side. There's a few small little spots of blotchiness and everything. I don't know, like right there. Nothing too major, at least on the right ones so far, but definitely needs a good conditioning on them. So let's set the right one aside, and now let's check out the left one. Let's see, double check all the stitching. Now I'm checking for the welt stitching up top here to see if there's any kind of issues around there. Doesn't seem like there's anything there. Now there is it's kind of funny though. So I don't know if it's quite visible, but it starts out with a really wide stitch here at the forefoot. And then once you start getting towards the back here, right about in that arch area, it becomes very dense. They have a lot narrower stitching. Narrow stitching is better, higher quality considered to be, but it's just a huge transition from a wide stitch to a very narrow stitch and just back and forth. So, you know, at first glance, I'm looking it over everywhere. Doesn't really seem like there's any kind of issues major with it. I mean, there's a few nicks and dings, and that could happen during shipping as well. I mean, there's a little bit of a dark spot right there, so nothing major there. A little bit of scratching underneath there and there. Stitching, I mean, there's a few little spots here and there where the stitching didn't sit inside the channel well enough. So overall, there really isn't much going on. Double check, forgot to double check the eyelets on the other one, but let's check through. Well, looks like there's a culprit there. Looks like the inner dye that they used on the leather or whatever, it rubbed off onto the tongue right here. So we'll clean that up some. Insides look fairly alright. I'll check this one here. Yeah, a few dark spots there where the eyelets are. Oh, we got a bent eyelet. There's a bent eyelet right there. So we're gonna have to fix that up. Now the eyelets, you're not gonna see them from the outside, obviously, but from the inside, depending on what type of lace pattern he decides to do. Again, this is for Simon to decide what he wants to do. Does he want to put a blue or red lace in there and do the ladder pattern, or I don't remember all the proper terminology for all the lace patterns. There's so many of them nowadays. But depending on how he does it, he may end up having to go through a lot of laces just because of that one little eyelet there. And we're gonna have to fix that up. We'll put it under one of our presses. We might even be able to hammer it out. I'll have to put like a little die piece on the other side here and then carefully tap it down so that it all gets nice and flat there. But otherwise, I mean, everything seems okay. I mean, it just seems like overall this pair is not quite a second per se. It looks like it may have just been returned because there's some slight noticeable wear right here on the toe. Looks like whoever wore these, maybe just around their house or in the office or something, they had kicked the toe a little bit, and so the leather toe here had bunched up kind of funny. So definitely doesn't seem like it's an actual factory second. It just looks like somebody had returned these and they were, you know, slightly used, so they had to damage them out as a factory second, basically. So nothing major, but what we're going to do to these here today is, let me go ahead and close up the box and get that out of the way. We're going to be doing a number of things. Now, Simon gave me permission to go all out on these and kind of do whatever to them, but he did request a few particular things, and he couldn't quite make up his mind whether he wanted to do a day-night sole or a leather sole with a rubber half sole, and he kind of left it up to me to make that decision. But I think I'm going to go ahead and do a leather sole. It looks a little bit nicer. We're going to go ahead and remove this bottom sole here. Going to put on the thinnest version of the JR sole that we have, because we're also going to be doing a midsole on these for him. Now the midsole you guys are going to check out is going to be different. Unique, in other words. So hopefully you like it, Simon, but it's going to be a different kind of upgrade, as well as we're going to add the GTO crosshatch half sole that just comes down to, well, I'll show it on here, comes down to about right here. So we're going to go ahead and start by taking everything off. We'll see how the cork is, because these were, it looks like, worn possibly just a little bit. I'm going to have to make sure I examine that cork very closely. If there's any kind of slight damage even to the cork, I'm going to tear it out and replace it. Not necessary to do that, but if I see damage, I will. So let me go ahead and get that, and I'll be right back. All right, so we're going to start off by removing the heel. I'll grab my pliers here. Now this video I'll probably do fairly long. I may even possibly have to do it in a two-part. I'm not 100% sure. It just depends how long it's going to be, because a very long video does take some time to upload. And I know some of you out there, as well as Simon, some of you ladies and gentlemen, like a long video. I guess it's relaxing or just enjoyable to watch. So on this pair of shoes, I'll go ahead and make it a long video. I've been trying to cut down on the length of my videos, make them shorter if possible. But this will be for those few of you out there who really want that extended video. So, you know, you guys are going to hear a lot of me talking and chatting, basically, up a storm. I'm going to remove the top lift. Kind of a shame to just toss it, but we don't really reuse the top lifts all that much, unless we're using it for a build-up version, but it still has the original Allen Edmond style like that. For any of you out there, if you are wanting the original Allen Edmond style heel, we do have those in stock, actually. They both, see, got the AE symbol on there. We get them through the same supplier that actually sells them to Allen Edmond directly. So if anybody wants them, I personally am not a big fan of them at all, but if you want them, we can definitely put them on. If you want a rubber heel, I go for the GTO usually. Vibram's a pretty good one too. I just haven't been too happy with the Vibram standard top lift lately, so we've been going with the GTO a little bit more. So gives us a little bit of difference. Oh no, I'm out of thinner. Let me go refill my thinner bottle. Or turpentine, I'm sorry, not thinner. Turpentine. I'll be right back. Okay, how to refill the turpentine. Where's the shoe? There it is. Now, this of course is to deactivate the adhesives in here, especially under the heel block. Now the heel blocks, they tend to be a fiberboard material, and or not fiberboard. Wait, is it fiberboard? I forgot what it was. I already spaced out. I've been having some issues with remembering names of certain things. Yeah, it is fiberboard. What am I thinking? But basically, it's equivalent to like plywood, in other words. It's just thin paper that's highly compressed and everything, and you know, it works good, but it's definitely not stacked leather. So, you know, I think for Simon's shoes, these well-deserved shoes deserve a bit of an upgrade. So I'm going to be removing these heel blocks. I'm not going to reuse them except for to trace out the patterns and all that, whatever I may need. But I'm going to build them up some new heel blocks with JR leather. Not these soles because they're already pre-cuts. We got a large sheet that we're going to cut out of, and you know, I almost wonder if I should show you guys how I try to cut it. Maybe I'll have Janelle holding the camera while I'm cutting it because it just looks so goofy because it's a really large sheet. I mean, I've cut out a fair amount of chunks out of it, so it's not as bad as when I started cutting it for the first time. But the first time I was cutting it, man, it looked so funny because I'm trying to balance it on my shoulder while pinching it down at the side of my head, and at the same time holding it and turning the arm on the machine. And it was a funny look. I always manage to get into those odd situations where I'm having to hold something all odd shaped and oversized or balancing somehow weird. Some of the things just look epically funny. Alright, now the question of who may have stolen my tool here. Nobody stole it. Ha, it was in my drawer. I'm still getting used to my workbench and the setup here. This here is called Big Bertha. It's a big toolbox. But everyone's like, why'd you name it Big Bertha? Because it's mine and I have the right to name it. Alright, now for any of you first time watchers, what I'm using here is called a heel pry. Slightly angled tool like that, flat on the top, well, somewhat flat. It's got a tapered edge, so it's sharp but not too sharp. So it's not like a knife or anything, but it's sharp enough for me to be able to reach into nooks and crannies and pull it up. Kind of like this heel base here. Heel block, some of you may know it as. And just lift it up and pry up this heel. And that's why it's called a heel pry. Now it can be used for other purposes, and actually we use it every day for a lot of other uses and purposes too. So it's kind of like the ultimate cobbler's multi-tool that we really have to have. If we don't have one of these, it's going to be very challenging and frustrating to do a lot of these jobs. I mean, it's doable, but not always. So we got the heel block out. Now, typically we usually take out these nails here. These are gripper nails that are sticking out right there. And you know, because we're not going to be reusing these heel blocks, we don't necessarily need to. So I'm going to end up just setting these heel blocks aside and just using them for marking. And then if I ever need them for something that I'm just messing around with, maybe they'll come in handy. But for the time being, I'm not going to be messing with them. Alright, so we got the first heel block off. Carefully get some more turpentine around the welt area there. Again, I'm still getting used to my little area, and especially because I'm trying to have everybody be able to see what it is I'm doing. There we go. Now I don't want to flip that over, otherwise some of that turpentine might get on that upper. Okay, wipe my hand off on the towel here. Now, for those of you who don't know, Allen Edmonds is one of those old traditional American companies, made in America shoe. They're very well constructed. Now, especially there's one person who's, I guess, subscribed to my channel that's always dogging Allen Edmonds, like all the time and everything, and saying, hey, you know, don't waste your money on Allen Edmonds, get such and such brand or something. Look, if you if you're new to footwear, or at least quality made footwear, if you're new to, you know, investing into your shoes, or even if you're, you know, somebody that's already fairly aware of quality built footwear, Allen Edmonds is definitely one of the best shoes to start out with. You know, for the price point, for the options of sizes, the options of different colors and designs, as well as how flexible they are with sorry about that interruption, but you know, Allen Edmonds in general, I mean, they're very flexible in everything that they have. Now granted, they do have some quality control issues with the footwear that they have, but their brand has been growing so much and so quickly that finding skilled cobblers that can make these shoes is very, very challenging. And then even training new cobblers up is another challenge all in himself. I know, I'm a cobbler. I mean, if I wanted to, I could make my own shoes too, but I'm not going to be able to do that just because I don't have the time. You know, I've got my hands full already with repairs alone. And finding somebody that could cover me is very hard to do. I mean, I have a gentleman that's helping me out significantly, but finding another person like him, yeah, that's a real challenge, that's for sure. So the turpentine's done its work already. It works fairly quick to deactivate the glue. Now I have to go grab my knife that I like to use real quick from the other bench, so I'll be right back. Sorry, I had to grab my rip knife. This is what's called a rip knife here. Looks like your standard angled razor blade knife, basically, but you know, is actually used a lot of times in the cobbler industry to be able to get in between the welt and the sole here and cut through it all. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now with this blade, what I'm gonna end up doing is I get right in between where the welt is and the sole meet, and then I just split the sole. I cut through the stitches simultaneously as splitting the sole. So I'll go ahead and show you this real quick. And just splits it right there, like that. Like that. It's a little bit harder to do without the last and kind of unsafe, but put it back on the last here. And go ahead and cut through it. Now, there's a handful of people that always tell me, don't cut towards yourself, don't cut towards yourself. Well, one, I've been doing this my whole life. Second generation in this after all. Two, I've had enough practice with this that I figured out that when I'm cutting, as you can tell, I'm standing on the opposite side of the shoe. And the angle that I'm cutting at is downward like this. So worst case scenario, if this does slip off, sorry again for the interruptions, but because I'm pulling it downward, the worst case scenario, this knife is going to slip off and go this direction away from me anyways. And because I tend to hold it like this in my hand, it's not going to end up cutting me or anything like that. I don't hold it at the very end here. I hold it fairly close to the blade, so I'm able to regulate the depth a little bit better by using the side of my palm here. So just thought I'd kind of show that to anyone that feels a little uncomfortable with the way I cut it. Now, there are some cases where I'll cut it a little bit too close around myself, and then there are other times where I'll cut away from myself. It just depends on the shoe and how well it's going to cooperate with cutting. Allen Edmonds is one of those that's a little bit easier to work with, so I could pretty much do it any direction. See, like right here, I'll get in and cut away from myself. Voila, got the sole off. Now hang on to that and use that to trace out the JR sole. Well, actually, I don't really even need to, because we're not trying to, we don't have to bother with that JR logo to be centered, because it's going to be sanded out slightly anyways, since we're going to be putting on the GTO crosshatch half sole. That GTO looks a lot like the original Vibram V-bar that they have, but a little bit different. The V-bar is best for traction forward and back, but the GTO, it's got these little crosses that cross over, so it gets good grip even side to side, not just forward and back. So it's kind of like a 360 kind of grip, where the V-bar technically is designed for better grip going forward and backwards, but not so well side to side. So just thought I'd point that out. Now the cork in here, yeah, see, and that's gonna have to come out, just because I'm not happy with that right there. So most of you probably won't see that, but and might not even feel it too, but there are little gaps all over the places here. Now they use hot cork method, so basically they just fill it in and then take a iron and kind of smooth it out. And so there's two problems with the hot cork method that a lot of these companies do. It's not just Allen Edmonds, I see it on shoes that are in the thousands too. And there's kind of a dilemma with the hot cork method. Sometimes they don't put enough, like in this case there's a lot of missed gaps here and there, and so there's just not a good enough insulation and support feature. That's what cork is in here for. Cork is designed to fill in the crevice. You can see that gap right there. That's where the welt is stitched to the uppers of the shoe, and then the welt is what's used to stitch the sole onto the shoe. And so that void right here, that gap, needs to be filled in. You can see it right here too. And that way you're not feeling that little lip right there, that 90-degree angle lip. Sometimes your foot might be able to feel that. Well, with cork, it's designed to fill that in, of course, so that you're not feeling that, as well as add some insulation, shock absorption, and as well, it helps wick away moisture, and it becomes a support feature. That's one of the key things about a quality pair of shoes. Doesn't matter if it's Allen Edmonds, Alden, Edward Green, John Lobbs, all these other brands that are Goodyear welted. Most of them, almost all of them, use a cork material. So right out of the box, they're not going to be as comfortable as a pair of, say, Johnson Murphy or Cole Haan or Echoes. Out of the box, those shoes will be more comfortable, but in the long run they're going to start falling apart, and then things start giving out, and they just go downhill very quickly, and you have to throw them away and then get a new pair, basically. Where with shoes like these, it's the exact opposite. Out of the box, they're not too comfortable, they're a little rough, they're hard. It takes a little bit of time to break them in. Give it some time. Once it's broken in, however, that cork is going to mold to your foot, and as well as the leather midsole, or leather insole in other words here. Once all those features mold to your foot nicely, it becomes like having a custom orthotic inside your shoes. So if you're a first-time buyer of Goodyear welted shoes like this, and you're switching from Cole Haan, Johnson Murphy, and other brands too that are similarly designed, give it some time. Wear these shoes, you know, a couple of hours a day, you know, maybe every other day. Sorry again for the interruptions. That was actually another gentleman that's on the Allen Edmonds enthusiast group and wax and dye group, Mark. But he's recently gotten into getting into shoes, and I think he's going a little crazy with Allen Edmonds especially. I think he's going in to all like the thrift stores and everything, trying to find the best deals he can on all sorts of shoes and stuff that he likes, and like retreating and shining them and everything, and even if they're not his size. Don't know exactly what he's planning to do with all of them. Some of them I guess he's reselling, some of them I think he's doing something with them. I have no clue, but yeah, he's really into the shoes as well. But anyways, where did I leave off on? So we're gonna go ahead anyways and take out all that cork. And if you're new to the footwear like this, give it some time. Be patient. Again, with also the leather uppers, same thing. These are full grain. They're not your corrected grain. Corrected grain leather, which is kind of that lower level of a piece of leather. When you take a thick piece of leather, the top layer is the full grain. It's got the pore structure. Might have a little bit of flaws. Again, it is leather, so it's not all perfect. But the next layer down is what they use for corrected grain leather. So they put a print on it. They put a heavy coat of a dye on it and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot softer and more flexible, in other words, to use the corrected grain leather. But long term, if you're looking at being able to have them for a very long period of time, corrected grain leather unfortunately does not hold up. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out. Give it time to break in the cork inlay, the leather footbed, and the full grain leather on it as well. Alright, so I've gone ahead and removed the other sole, and this one's no better. Same thing, a lot of gaps everywhere with the cork. I mean, all over the place, so definitely going to be a good idea to remove that and replace it to really fill it in nicely. One of the other dilemmas also with the hot cork method is you don't just sometimes end up with gaps like that. There are other cases where sometimes you get too much. If you have like a smaller size or something and they end up having like a predetermined amount squeezed in there, and then they take that hot iron and really force it into place and everything. And so what happens is also that when you're wearing the shoes, it feels very hard. It doesn't feel like it's breaking in. Like you could have had, you know, half a dozen pairs of Allen Edmonds. They all work great, and then all of a sudden you get that seventh pair, and it just feels very hard. Actually, a gentleman asked that a while back on the Allen Edmond group, and I'd mentioned that. That's one of the dilemmas with the hot cork method. And again, it's not just Allen Edmonds. I've heard about it from Alden as well. A lot of other great shoe brands that are even running into the thousands, where there is a little bit of that dilemma every now and then, where even those $1,000 shoes might have a little bit of an issue, because that's one of those things at the quality control level you can't quite visibly see that, because that cork is hidden underneath the sole and you can't reach in there and just feel it, or even put it on your foot and feel it right away. It's something that you're wearing for an extended period of time, and you realize, hey, these aren't breaking in as well as they should be. Same thing is true also when there's not enough cork sometimes too. If they don't put enough in this ball of the foot area, you know, you're standing directly on that leather sole or whatever it may be too. So that's kind of the dilemma of it all. Now we're going to go back to our heel pry, where we've got that multi-tool there. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling up that old cork. Well, not old, it's new cork still, but not happy cork, in other words. Pry it all up. Now, when we're removing cork, we don't always end up getting all of it, but you know, there's a few places that we're still able to basically sand out, and if there's a little bit left over, it's perfectly fine too. So if anybody ever wonders about that, that's one of those things that we're never going to be able to get every single piece of cork. Otherwise, we're going to have a little bit of an issue here and there if we're trying to really forcefully get some of it out. So we're going to remove as much as we can, sand out the remainder that we can reach to, and if there's a little bit left over, better not to mess with it and leave it as is. Okay. Now the shank in here, I have to really reach underneath it with this heel pry. There we go. There's a wooden shank. There we go. Looks like it's in good shape there. Okay. Now there's the wood shank, and obviously because these are a fairly new pair, they shouldn't be broken or anything, but if they're broken, we usually have to replace them. Now there are two types of shanks that we have, and let me go grab both of them for you. Now, as far as the replacement shanks, unfortunately, cobblers like us, we don't tend to carry the wooden style shanks, just because we don't. None of our distributors really stock those ones. We could make them, but you know, going a different route majority of the time is a bit of an upgrade too, but we try to keep those wood shanks for as long as possible. Once they finally give out, then we'll replace them. Now, since this is a newer pair and we are doing upgrades to it, we don't necessarily need to replace that shank. Now, when time comes to resole them, if the shank is broken, then we'll definitely replace it. And what we replace it with, typically most cobbler shops will use a metal one like this. And I know some people don't like it because they have to take off their shoes because the metal detectors, yada yada. Come on, if you're going through the airport or something, you gotta take off your shoes anyways. So it really doesn't make a difference whatsoever. All those TSA guys, they're all very well trained to identify what a shank is. So if they see that when it runs through the x-ray machines and all that, whatever scanners they're called, I can't remember, they're not actual x-ray, they're something else. But if it goes through that, they know what a shank is. They know how it's supposed to look like, so you're not going to get stopped by TSA or whoever, by any kind of security, saying, hey, you've got a piece of metal in your shoe, let's tear it apart and see what it is. No, those guys are very well trained to do so. My aunt actually is in TSA, so I know. The other option, though, and this one's not very common, not a lot of cobblers can get their hands on it, is a fiberglass shank like that. It's a little bit thicker than the metal one, of course, but it's roughly about the same thickness as what the original wood ones are. Of course, not as wide, but because it's fiberglass, it's a little bit denser. I mean, it still has a good amount of flexibility, not quite as much as the wood one, but definitely a great alternative and option. Now, shank, for any of you that don't know, has multiple uses and purposes for it. Again, shock absorption is one of the key ones, because when you're taking a step, it absorbs a lot of that impact at the heel area. The shank sits right underneath where the heel block is usually, right here, like that. And so it absorbs a lot of that first initial impact. But also when you're walking, you have that rollover effect. That's why your edge of the heel here on the outside gets worn out. So when you take a step, your heel impacts, so it absorbs the shock through the shank. The cork inside here absorbs a little bit of the shock too, and helps distribute it too and give some cushioning. And the other thing is, because of that rollover effect, since you've got a heel block like that, kind of drops down, even with a wedge, if you had that, the shank is going to give it some durability and strength in that arch area, because your foot doesn't bend behind the ball of the foot from here back. That's why I never understood some of those crazy tennis shoes that they have for athletic footwear. I'm not going to name them off, but when they show that, look at how flexible they are. They're like twisting and turning them. It's like, your foot's not supposed to bend in those areas. I know, I've done orthopedics as well for basically my whole life. I don't deal with it nowadays because I'm so concentrated on the repairs, but I know from when I used to work with it a lot of times that you need some kind of support underneath the foot, behind the ball of the foot area, because those bones aren't designed to bend and flex in such a manner. So that's where a shank comes in. Shank will also help with support features depending on the angle and pitch of it. It'll help give you a little bit of arch support as well in some cases, and in some cases it's just there to be able to help preserve that area so that your foot doesn't end up somehow oddly bending from the pressure, especially if you got a little extra weight, or if you're a very built guy. Muscle, after all, is fairly heavy too. That's it's something you have to consider. That's how you can end up with a flat foot. That shank is going to help preserve that as well. So I want to mention that. As far as the support features on Allen Edmonds as well, the heel blocks play a big role in that too. You can see that edge right there is actually a lot thicker. Well, even though it's kind of splitting on us here, let's press it down. But this edge is thicker than this edge. That thicker edge goes on the inside of the shoe here. Helps with that arch support again and pitching that heel properly, so that gives you that perfect stability and support feature. So thought I'd point that out in the aspect of supportive footwear. Now, I'm not trying to say that if you have bad feet or your foot isn't getting enough comfortable supportive aspects to it, I'm not saying that you need to get these because they're the most supportive thing. No, they're not. Every single person has a different foot, so different brands will work differently for them. Somebody Allen Edmonds, somebody needs a pair of Echoes or something. It's all over the place. So I thought I'd throw that out to you real quick. Now, one last thing I'll mention before I really start to get in here and clean this up. This plastic right here, some of you might be able to see. Again, like I said, it's going to be a longer video of me talking a lot, covering a lot of things. But this plastic right here, if you see that, and majority of the time you'll actually see it on the outside, sometimes maybe right here where the welt meets the upper. If you see that, it's not harmful to pull that out. That plastic is actually put on there before the welt is put on. It's designed to kind of shrink wrap that upper to protect it during the repair process or during the manufacturing process, I mean. So it protects that leather upper for the whole duration of the rest of the construction of the shoe. So this will definitely be one of those things that if you rip it out, tear it out, if you see chunks of it, don't be worried about it. You can definitely grab it and pull it. It's not going to damage your shoes because that's what they do at the factories anyways. That plastic is placed there as a temporary hold and it's designed to come out. So if you ever see a piece sticking out somewhere, and I thought I saw one somewhere here sticking out, so I see a tiny bit underneath there, you can always grab and just pull it. You'll be perfectly fine, or your shoes will be perfectly fine. So don't be concerned about that. That plastic can go and just be pulled. You don't need a special knife. Don't use knives on that. Don't try to cut it carefully. Just grab whatever you can, pull it. That's it. So I've got majority of this cork out. I'm gonna go ahead and sand up that bottom area there a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and get the stitches pulled up and start coming along to refilling that cork area. One other thing I like to point out is these shanks here. After I clean off all the cork and glue and everything off of it, well, even before it too, I like to grab a marker and mark down which shoe it goes to. So this is the left. We'll put Simon. Simon will have your name on the inside of your shoes. Simon. There you go. But I like to mark which shoe it goes to, left and right. You know, they're designed to really go in either shoe, but after a period of time, sometimes these shanks, they mold to that left foot or the right foot more so than the opposite foot. So it's always a good idea to put it back into place and have it fitting the same way. But thought I'd point that out. And Simon, there you go. Your name's on the inside of your shoes. All right. But let me go ahead and get the rest of that taken care of. Got most of the cork again cleaned out of that one there. And we'll go ahead and do this one too. I'll probably, once I finish cleaning out that cork, before I do much else, I'll come back here and kind of talk about the construction of the inside here for all those newer people watching. So helps you identify how things are constructed on a Goodyear welted shoe like this. So we'll see you back in just a little bit. So as I said, I was going to talk about a few things. I did end up kind of skipping over a few things. I'm sorry on the video, especially you, Simon. I know how much you enjoy watching the videos. But I ended up pulling all the stitches out. I did do it by hand using an awl like this right here and just going through carefully and removing it. We do have a stitch puller on one of our machines. Some of you, if you've seen our other videos, I've used it a few times and it works great. I only don't like to use it on certain types of colors, I guess you can say, just because again the wheel spins really fast and it can end up burning that leather a little bit if it's a lighter color. Sometimes it doesn't do that on certain shoes as well. Full grain leathers tend to hold up very well to it, especially with years of practice. We're very careful about it, but as a precaution, sometimes we just do it by hand. And it's also a moment for us to sit down and just kind of relax, in other words. So as far as the construction underneath, I wanted to show this real quick. So we've got the welt right here on the outside. Sorry about the noise, by the way. We've got a handful of people working here today. But the welt here is stitched to the upper of the shoe, basically. But in reality, what it also stitches through is the upper, the liner, which is, of course, the leather here on the inside, on the sides, like right there. And then it also goes through at the same time in the back of the heel area and at the toe. It goes through those heel and toe counters. There's a little bit of plastic, maybe you might be able to see it. This little thin row of plastic right there that goes in between the liner and the upper, the leather upper. Finally, once it goes through all of that, it goes through this fine little fabric piece right here called the gemming right across this area. Now the gemming is glued down to the leather insole. So this piece right here, this little patch that you see right here, is actually the same leather insole on the inside right there. So the whole shoe is really constructed off of this one insole right here. They start with that insole, they construct the shoe around it and everything. Bespoke custom made shoes, they actually start with the insole and then they start tacking leather onto there. With a lot of shoe manufacturers like Edmonds, they pre-assemble the upper and then they finally start attaching it to this leather midsole. So if you're ever wanting to have your insoles replaced here, it is a really big task to do. Don't be surprised, don't be shocked if you have a lot of cobblers say they won't do it, they can't do it. Edmonds won't do it. Original factories won't do it unless it's just placing a new leather insole over top of it and just gluing it down. That's an option, but if you're actually wanting this torn out and replaced, it's a big job. So keep that in mind. I've had a few requests for that, and then when I tell them the price, their jaw drops. I actually had one guy grab his boots or his shoes and just ran out the door without even saying another word. But I just want to point that out. It is a very large job. We basically have to take apart this gemming. We got to take apart the welt. We got to take apart just about everything in here. It is a really big task. So I want to point that out to everyone. Now, as you can tell, I've already got the shanks glued in place. Sorry, skipped over that too. Simon, your name is still underneath these shanks there for you. But here is this cork that we like to use. Now, this is cork that's already pre-made, obviously. It's pre-cut. Usually I have sheets of it, but unfortunately right now we're out of stock of it, and all of our suppliers at the moment are out of stock as well. So we're going to do the pre-cuts. It's the same cork, exactly the same. It's just pre-cut already instead of coming in a sheet and we cut it out ourselves by hand. Now the pre-cuts, the reason why a lot of us cobblers like it is it's more cost effective for a cobbler shop to have than having a hot cork machine. The other thing is why I will not get a hot cork machine regardless. If I have the opportunity to buy it for even $10 or even if it was given to me for free, I still go this route anyways. Mainly because these cork chunks here, the pre-cuts, the sheets, that are predetermined thickness and predetermined density, where a hot cork, unfortunately, they end up ironing it in, forcing it in, not enough. As you saw, there were a lot of gaps everywhere. You're not going to have so much of an issue with this here. We end up just placing it in here, just like that, and hammering it. Now, if you're thinking that because I'm hammering or applying pressure, I'm flattening out the cork, not really actually. This cork is popping back up because I'm going to leave it and give it a little bit of time to let that adhesive underneath here, because we did use a contact cement on the bottom of the cork pieces and on the inside, if I can get this off here. And so I'm going to let that adhesive take hold and cure properly. Where with a hot cork method, they end up doing it all really fast. It's a production line, so everything's done fast and everything, and it just doesn't exactly work out the way you'd want it to sometimes. But all these excess pieces we're gonna take off here just a little bit. Those are too small to reuse, basically. Sometimes we'll save little pieces because it helps fill in certain areas and stuff, but those are a little bit too small. Oh, oops, sorry, dropping stuff here. But as you can tell here, however, there's a small little gap where it just doesn't fill in all the way. So that's when I'm going to use a small piece, and I'm going to go ahead and insert it in there and use the back end of my French hammer. For any of you that don't know, this is what's called a French hammer here. This is one of my newer ones that I do not like because it's got a dinky little handle and it's very lightweight. But we end up using that back end there if you saw me using it. Like that. Gets that cork filled in between the shank especially. Now I'm gonna have to add a second layer of cork because I do want to fill it in all the way, and sometimes the cork, you know, comes thinner, sometimes it comes thicker. There are a few different thicknesses, And again, the sheets that I usually get, they're the ones that are thicker, because everyone's out of stock of them at the moment. We end up doing it a little bit differently, and or a more traditional type of way. In other words, we're going to end up double layering it. So double layering it means that I'm going to go ahead and sand this just a little bit, just enough to get some of this excess off here, get that off, and then end up putting a more even second layer there, because right now my biggest goal is trying to really fit in all of these little cracks, and obviously the cork is going to crack, it's going to, you know, leave little gaps and everything, and so I want to make sure that I get that in as best I can. And you know, after it leaves all those little divots and everything, because there's the shank underneath here, so it's an uneven surface, I'm going to take more cork strips, in other words, and fill it in some more, and any of the remainder is just going to get sanded out until it's finally perfectly smooth, or not smooth, perfectly straight and leveled. So I'll go ahead and let this one sit for a little while, fill in the next shoe, and get ready to sand it up just a little bit. I don't need to let it sit for too long when I'm putting on the second layer of cork. It's just a few minutes and it's ready to go, because I'm only doing a very, very light sanding, and so I can put on the second layer of cork just fine. But I'm going to go ahead and get these going, get the second layer taken care of, and then we'll start getting ready for the next stage, and we'll see you back then in a few minutes, or for you guys it'll be a few seconds, I guess. Alright, so we've got everything filled in and setting flush with that cork there nicely, and we've double glued it all. Obviously with leather we always do that, just because the first coat is kind of like a primer, it settles in and soaks into the leather, and then the second coat's what's actually going to stick the best. Now for Simon, what we're going to be doing here, he was really excited about doing red in his shoes, especially these ones here, and since he gave us freedom to do whatever the hell we want with it, I am going to be doing something a little bit abnormal. We're going to be taking a Vibram Sole instead of a midsole, because obviously red is a little harder to come by for a midsole. Able to order it from one of our suppliers, but unfortunately at this given moment we aren't able to get those in, and so we're going to give them a little bit of an upgrade. I know it's cost wise, some of the other cobblers that may be watching might be thinking you are completely nuts for it. Yeah, why not? But hey, for Simon, I think he deserves a good upgrade. We're actually going to take one of these Vibram soles right here and put that on as a midsole for him. We ended up, well, I ended up testing it out here, just sanding it to see how well I could sand out that tread there, because we don't want that on there. But he's gonna have a Vibram midsole. Simon, hope you end up liking that. And obviously since it's a midsole, we don't really have to trace it out or anything. I'll still try to center at least the Vibram logo, so it ends up being a little bit of a surprise for any future cobbler that might be working on it as well. And because we are adding this as a midsole, and since we'll have the traction completely off of here, we ended up going with a thinner JR sole. This is a 8 to 9 iron. This is where most of our rigidness will be coming from, is the leather sole here. And over top of that, we're also going to be adding the GTO crosshatch half sole. So I don't need to trace these out. Typically with our resole process with JR, we'll take the old sole like this here, we'll trace it out to try to get that JR logo as center as possible, but since it's going to be covered up anyways, there really isn't any kind of point, because we have to sand that slightly as well. And you know, it sounds like a crazy mix-up of all sorts of things all at once. Yes, it does. You got Vibram, you got JR and GTO all in one shoe, but Simon wanted something a little bit crazy, and go ahead and do something crazy for him. When I meant it, I meant it. So he's going to now have a Vibram embedded into it along with everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this on the press real quick, press out the welt area here on our welt press, trim it up, let it cure overnight, and I definitely want to make sure this cures nicely, thoroughly overnight, because this is a rubber onto leather. It needs a little extra time before we start really sanding it out, because we do have to sand a lot, and that heat can deactivate the adhesive from having to sand out all that tread pattern there. So I'll let this sit and cure. I've got the other one in the oven. I don't want to end up burning it, because a few weeks ago I ended up burning a different type of red sole, and it melted on me. It looked like some kind of kid's snack candy basically after it melted. It's kind of funny looking. I don't think I have it up here. I have it somewhere else, but maybe I'll show you guys, let you see what it looks like in a second. So let me go ahead and stick the other one together, stick this on the press, and I'll be back here in just... Alright, so we've got the what we're going to call the midsole, but technically it's a Vibram full sole here on. This is the one that I've tested out with the sanding and everything to see how well it sands. Obviously you can tell there's a little too much everywhere, so we'll have to sand that out. That's why we'll let it sit and cure overnight nicely, so tomorrow we don't have any kind of issues with it coming undone. But as I had mentioned, I'll show you what happened. This was a Caselli mirror full sole, looks like this, and I left it in the oven just a little bit too long, and then I remembered these are not good for sticking into an oven. Doesn't it look yummy? But thought I'd show that. So I'll see you back here tomorrow when it's time to keep grinding away at these other ones here. Alright, so we've got the sole all cured up. This is the one that I started out with the sanding, and so the goal, of course, was to find out where it's all gonna sit and how well this is gonna sand, of course. So it looks like it's gonna sand fairly well. I just needed somewhat of a stiffer surface area, and having it on the shoe directly was definitely a good way to go. So as far as my guide, as far as how far down I'm going to sand it, it's basically down to the tread. Like once the tread is all off, that's the perfect thickness right there for these. So I'm going to go ahead and start shaving that off. It's a very time consuming process, but at the moment we're kind of having to do that route, in other words. But in the long run, I think it's going to be very beneficial to have that option of a Vibram midsole, in other words, like this. So I'll go ahead and get started on that then. Okay, so we got one of them sanded down, kind of like that there. Looking pretty good so far. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the other one real quick. I'm also going to double check the thickness. Let me go grab my gauge. It looks like I might need to touch up a few other spots here on this one, just a tiny bit, so let me grab my gauge. Alright, so we're back here again. We allowed everything to cool off. We've got it all glued up now, and still got a little bit of that Vibram logo in there, kind of like that. I mean, it doesn't say Vibram, but it's got the logo in there at least underneath, so typically everyone knows what the Vibram logo looks like, at least shape-wise. So I've got the JR sole here. Of course, this is the 8 to 9 iron. Now 8 to 9 iron means that it's the thickness of the leather, and we've got multiple ones. It goes from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10, 11, and then 11 to 12 even, and those 11 to 12s are very thick. Those are for Western boots mostly. I've used them a few times on dress shoes and all, but I just pulled this out of the oven, and now when we put it in the oven, mainly there's two things that we're doing with the oven. One is, of course, activating the adhesive, because this is contact cement that we use. I always have a tendency to call it rubber cement. I don't know why, just got used to it. My father used to call it like that for many years, and so that's what I called it for many years, but it's a contact cement. And so heat activates it, it also deactivates it, but you know, it deactivates it. Like if we put this sole on, we didn't stitch it, and you left it in a hot car, at that point it's going to deactivate it. And basically most shoe companies, shoe makers, boot makers, they use the very similar stuff, not the exact same glue, but very similar. There's certain minor differences. One type of adhesive will end up using a toluene, another one will use an acetone base. You know, there's just a number of different variants out there. We have a few different versions. We tend to use this pot right here that I always use, and that's what I used for these ones, is Jet Set contact cement. It's toluene based, so technically it's not the best health-wise, like if we're inhaling fumes, but I'm not shoving my face into it all that much. I mean, like right now, if I stick my face close to it, all of that toluene has evaporated, it's gone. So this is not harmful breathing. This one in this jar here I have, this one's acetone based. That one's Renya there. So I just thought I'd point that out real quick. Before I keep also blabbering too much, I gotta start sticking this here. Now, as far as the other reason why we stick it in the oven is because these JR soles are very tough leather. So some cobblers, they'll spray down with water, make it softer to be able to fold it and wrap it around the sole. And in my case, I always have best luck heating it up. I prefer that method. Sorry, gotta do a little bit of hammering. Now, as I had also mentioned, now typically we take the original sole like we have right here, and we trace out the new JR sole carefully around, and then cut it as close as we can to that line so that it all fits and this JR logo centered, so on and so on. But because we're putting a GTO half sole over top, that JR logo is going to be gone anyways. Now, the other thing I was really hoping to be able to do is put our little Cobblers Plus logo on there. Simon was hoping to have that on there. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find it right now. I have a feeling that one of our part-time workers here ended up taking it home for a project they were working on. They were hoping to borrow it, and I don't think they brought it back yet at the moment. And so I got to grab that from them to try to make sure I put that on, because I don't remember what project they were going to surprise me with, whatever it was. But I'm going to go ahead and run this over to the press. I'll actually let you see what that looks like and explain that part. Which reminds me also, I don't know why that reminds me, I got to stick the other sole into the oven. My ovens are a little bit on the smaller side, which is good. That way I can do it like a cycle basically, and just you know, while one sole's in the oven, I'm pressing the other one. Once I'm done pressing one, then I switch over and start working on the other shoe. Makes it more efficient, at least for me. But anyways, before I keep talking more and more, let's run this over to the press real quick. All right, so we're over at our press now. Stick this on while it's still warm. So this press here, it's got multiple different attachments. Right now we're using the heel attachment. Here's a smaller one like that. So it's designed to just press out the heel area. There are some presses that face the opposite direction. They do the whole foot all at once, and there's a lot of different variants out there as well. I prefer this method. I'm really happy with this one in particular, because what happens is when we're pressing out just the heel, it gets that concentrated area pressed out very nicely and everything. And then as it's doing that, we do a section at a time. Let me go ahead and lift this up. Got this wedge here, by the way, for certain angles that if we need to be able to accommodate. Okay, just leave that very lightly. But what happens is the air pockets, and this usually happens with rubber, not so much leather. If it's leather on leather contact, it's not a big issue. Rubber on rubber, or leather on rubber, or composite material or anything like that, you can end up with little air pockets, and these air pockets will sometimes go away, sometimes they get trapped in there. But if they get trapped, the problem is that that's just an extra area where the materials didn't touch, and so that contact cement wasn't able to adhere, and so that air pocket can end up becoming a point where it squeaks. It's a weak spot, and it just turns out to be a mess in the long run of things. So that's why I really like our particular setup for the press, because it makes all the bubbles start shifting slowly to the front, because we do a section at a time. So we do the heel right there, we scoot up just a little bit more there, then once we're done with that area, you can see that little bit of a gap. We go from here to the ball of the foot, and then from the ball of the foot to the toe. So it doesn't give equal pressure on the whole shoe all at once, which might sound great and everything, but we're doing a different approach to it, which works beautifully. I mean, I'm not saying this is better than all the other methods. I'm not saying that it's worse than any other method. It's just one form of option. And for me, I've had the best of luck because I've used those other versions of presses too at other shops too. When I work for other places, I've tried different ones for years. I remember before presses came out, we actually, cobblers, used to do everything by hand, hammering all the time. And hammering really took a toll on our hands. So that's when presses came out. It allowed us to do these crazy jobs. Sometimes we get like this crazy huge boot that, you know, you hammer and it's still not working. You know, the material's too thick, the boot's too stiff. And so it took a toll on our hands in the long run of things. But when presses came out, I mean, this press is capable of pushing, you know, 800 pounds basically. I mean, pressing down at 800 pounds. So it's very powerful. Now, we don't have it set to that point because that's, especially for an Allen Edmonds, that's going to be overkill like crazy. And for a number of other shoes, it'd be overkill. So that's what we're doing here. But now at this point, this one's all set. I'm going to run it to the 5-in-1, which is right behind the camera. So let me readjust the angle and let you see what that. Okay, so now we're over at what's called our 5-in-1, and this is a tabletop machine that's hand operated, and so it's designed to do multiple things. It's called a 5-in-1 because it's supposed to do 5 things, you know, but they kind of crammed a few things into one category, or separated a few categories into 2. So in reality, it does really 3 different things. So what it does is it presses the welt, which is right here. That's what we're going to use right now. It's got a skiver down here, so it splices the leather. That's why if you come across if you've seen my table, sometimes you'll see these little scrap pieces that are beveled. Those are mostly for half soles and other things that we do sometimes. And then down here we've got our actual cutter that cuts off all the extra. So right now I'm going to be using the welt press section of it, and so it's going to press down right here and squeeze all the materials together. I already did that when we used that Vibram Sole for the midsole. Now we're going to go ahead and do that for the leather portion of it, the JR sole. Press it all around. Sorry, I'm trying to also concentrate so I don't accidentally hit the camera with the shoe itself. And there we go. Double check to make sure there are no loose spots anywhere around, because if there are, I can always go through and repress those and press down a little bit. Oh, see, there goes the camera again. And then press down a little more firmly. And it doesn't seem like there's really any spots, but sometimes if they seem a little questionable, I'll press down just a little bit extra just to make sure. But at this point, I'm done with it. I'm going to let it cure again overnight. Again, this process can take long sometimes. I mean, I could technically cut it all off and you know, let it cool off and then trim it. Technically, that's what this adhesive is around. I can't talk this evening. Technically, that's what this adhesive is designed to be able to do. But I mean, it's the end of the day here anyways. I had a lot of other things I had to work on at the same time, and I'd much rather let it sit and cure for the whole evening or the whole night. So tomorrow morning I come in, confidently cut off all the extra, trim it out, and start getting ready for that rubber GTO half sole on these. But I'll go ahead and set these aside. I've got the other one in the oven. I want to make sure I don't burn it, and I'll be back over here later then. All right, so we've got a handful of things here that we're going to go ahead and sand out at this point. I've got the GTO, dang it, can't think right now. The GTO half soles, I already got them pre-cut. You can see a little area there. I still have to sand it a little bit to kind of round it out in some areas. And then I got to sand it a little bit to bevel out that edge right here where it makes it connect a little more smoothly, in other words. Also on the toe area, I'm going to sand it out just ever so slightly because we are going to go ahead and put on some Triumph toe plates, and the Triumph toe plates are thinner than this. This piece of GTO here is a 3mm, which is usually the thinnest. It goes 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 3mm is usually the thinnest, but it's still a little too thick, so it kind of bulges out just a tad bit. So I'm gonna have to end up sanding out this toe area a little bit. I gotta see where it all hits first. So for now, I'm at least gonna sand out this edge here, make sure it's all nice and even. Trim out the edges of the soles here, and then of course I've got the JR leather heel bases start up, so I got to sand those out and get them rounded off and start gluing those together as well. So it's a combination of multiple things that we have to sand and glue and all at once, in other words, to make it efficient, in other words. But I'll go ahead and get started on the sanding. Okay, so I've got this one trimmed up roughly at the moment, all around the edges. Obviously, it's of course rough at the moment, but I've got the heel base pieces sanded up also, so I'm going to get these ones glued up so they start drying a little sooner than everything else for us. Now, as far as the sole or the shoe itself, since we already have everything on here, I do have to, however, get this protective sole here, or the half sole in other words, kind of lined up so I can see where I need to cut off the extra material off of to gauge roughly where I need to sand that toe piece on the rubber itself to make it just a tiny bit thinner, in other words, and do some marking up. It's a little complicated, I guess you can say, to explain it all, but because these come out of sheets, very large sheets, and I just take a protective sole that we already have from a different brand or different style, trace it out, cut it, and so there's always going to be leftover because those protective soles that we have are a little large. But I have to make sure that I get this kind of evened out a little bit at the toe to be thinner so we can continue on. So it's a little on the complicated side, I guess, of the steps that we're going to take, which way we're going to approach everything, because I still didn't get my nameplate or logo plate that I'm going to have to place here as well. Hopefully I can go pick that up tonight from one of the people that we have working here, because they were working on some kind of project and just wanted to borrow it, and I have to make sure I get it back over here. But that kind of gives you the rough idea of what it's going to be like. I did have to get off camera real quick and readjust this tapering here already, because you can see one's a little bit deeper than the other. Let's see if I can show you real quick. There we go. It's a little more intense on one of them than the other, and so that one was just a little bit too intense to be able to approach the sanding of it and getting it to be nice and elegant looking, in other words. This one here, I already sanded out the edges. I don't know if that's quite visible, but the very edge here is beveled down, so it's going to be a nicer, smoother transition from the 3mm down to roughly about 1.5 millimeters. So that will definitely help it visually, at least, and then that transition will help it stay longer as well. So let me go ahead and trim out the other shoe. I didn't do that one yet on camera. Glue up these heel base pieces here of leather, and then start marking up the GTOs and everything. And I'm going to mark it up right here where I need to sand it out, the heels also where I need to sand everything, and continue on. So let me get that taken care of, and I'll see you back in just a little bit. Alright, so today's already the next day. I put the little leather stack pieces together already. I've got the soles up there, or the shoes up there, ready to sand some more, but I wanted to let these cure overnight to make sure that they bond together properly before I really start cutting into them. Usually it's the first two layers that are kind of ones that I like to have the most secured. In other words, any additional layers, they can cure a little bit quicker, definitely, but the first two layers, because there's so much compressing it between going with the shoe right here, and then you got another layer here, you got the top lift here, if so too. It's just a lot of layers and doesn't allow this to really dry as well. I mean, the leather's still breathable enough that it'll eventually finally settle in and cure, but because we're working on it, I'd rather have it done right. But at this point, I thought I'd give you guys a chance to see. I think this might be the first time I'm actually showing this. This is our bandsaw. Let me just adjust this here for the height, and we just use this to cut off larger pieces. So I mean, I could run this through our 5-in-1, but the problem is because it's so thick, on a 5-in-1, when you're cutting the material that's this thick, it can end up a little wonky or lopsided. But if I do it on the bandsaw here, it's going to allow us to get a more even and straight cut. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and use for this right now. Just make sure I got a decent height and everything with that stopper. But let me go ahead and get this started up then. Alright, so this isn't to cut it exact, of course, obviously. This is just cut off a little bit of the extra around the edges here. Just makes it a little bit more of a pain in the butt later on down the road to either cut off all this extra or anything. So sometimes with the bandsaw, we'll go ahead and cut off some of that and just round off the edges just a little bit. Like right here, I didn't touch that up just in case. I'm going to leave that small edge there usually behind in case I need a little extra or something. You never know. But just like these corner pieces, it makes it perfect to cut off and kind of even it out nicely. Still have to sand out this area here to make it a little more flush, rough up one of the edges, and then start figuring out and adjusting the height level of it and everything. So I'll go ahead and get that taken care of, and we'll move back over to the sander and start sanding up the rest. I'll let you check that out, but that'll let you see what this looks like here, at least for the first time, with the bandsaw here. Obviously my blade is starting to get a little dull and I'm gonna need to change it. I'm actually trying to hunt down a very specific type of blade for this kind of use, but we use this thing a lot of times to cut off soles that are more on like a hiking boot, orthopedic style lifts, or if we're resoling a work boot as well, like certain types of heavy soles, because some of them, they don't exactly cut easily by hand and you can't just pull it off, and sanding it takes forever basically. So this just kind of makes it a little bit quicker and easier for us to do, and then touching up things like this perfectly as well. So let me go ahead and finish out this second one here, and we'll move back over to the sanders and continue on there. Alright, so we're back at the machine right now. So I'm going to be doing things a little bit, I guess you can say, different, just because I'm trying to get a little bit of a color scheme going just in that little area, because up here up to the toe, that's all going to get covered anyways. And then of course this is going to be covered here, so there's just going to be a little strip of where we have an opportunity to put some color in. And I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit different. So what I'm going to end up doing is first sanding out these areas here where we're going to have the half sole placed on there. I cut them down a little bit more to size, marked it up where the toe plates would roughly sit so that I can sand that out a little more flush, and then sand out the heel area here. But after I do that, I'm going to go ahead and channel just this back area right here, and maybe get into where the line is just a little bit. So I'll end up pre-channeling all that, and then once these are on, then I'll channel these a little bit more, and finally we'll be able to stitch everything. But I want to get that all taken care of beforehand so that I can sand out that area a little bit with some smoother sandpaper, and put a little bit of a finish on there, as well as put our logo. And I ended up picking it up last night finally, so we'll go ahead and get that all started up and taken care of. Okay, so I've got obviously the heel bases sanded out. I'm not doing the smooth quite yet as far as the inside here, just because I want to see if I need to adjust for height and everything and get all the pitch taken care of correctly. I've got the first shoe done. I still got to do the second one. Problem that I'm having is right here at the very back edge. I've got my what is it, the oversized C-clamp that I have my camera sitting on. It's kind of in the way. As you can see, it bounces a little bit when I hit it, so I can't quite get in under there. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that off of camera so I can really get into that area a little bit nicer, and then I'll go ahead and do the same thing with this other one here. Next step, of course, I'm going to lightly sand this out with the numb cake, and then do the palm sander on it as well. So that's kind of standard stuff, nothing too crazy. I'm going to do that real quick, but I'll let you guys check out the what I'm going to be doing as far as the bottom finish itself on there. So let me go ahead and get all that taken care of real quick, and be back in a second. One last thing I'll show you real quick. Might not be too visible, but I did sand out this little portion here because the very tip, of course, is going to be cut out afterwards to accommodate those French toe plates, or the Triumph toe plates as well. And I just wanted to have that rubber sanded out just a little bit in those areas so that it kind of sits a little more flush with those Triumph toe plates. So let me go ahead and get all that taken care of, and we'll see you back here in a little bit when it's time to do that bottom stain for it. Alright, so I've got this area sanded out a little bit so it's nice and smooth, but at the same time kind of rough, in other words, because we use a 220 grit sandpaper. But I thought I'd show off our little logo thing. I'm doing a little bit of a different method I tried experimenting with actually kind of burning it a little bit more. And let me go ahead and do this really quick. Let's see. Try to center that. It's an experiment, so it's not turning out the way I'd like it to. I think I may have to sand it because it didn't end up actually going in all that well. It's all an experiment sometimes, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and do the finish on here first, because the turpentine and dyes and everything that's in those finishes, you'll see what I'm talking about. It'll soften up that leather a little bit so that when I end up hammering it, it'll actually embed a little bit better. But I was heating it up on our heat gun over here, and that way I'll kind of burn it on there, but it didn't, because I didn't hit it hard enough, it kind of bounced and didn't turn out all that well. I'll show you real quick, see how it bounced. So it did a little bit of an indent, not enough to leave a permanent imprint, so I'm gonna grab the palm sander and kind of sand it off a little bit. I did, oh, it's still warm. I did think about wanting to do maybe a letter on each shoe, do a SK for Simon Kim, whose shoes these are. Simon, I know you're probably fine with me mentioning your name. I was going to use the alphabet that we had here. But however, when I started putting it on the heat gun, my S melted. It literally melted. Look at that thing. It's all deformed. That's what it looked like. This is an O right here, and that's the S. Ugh, cheap junk. I don't even remember where I got it. But yeah, I was just sitting there for a good while like that, still cooling off a bit. And you can see I experimented right there in that area, so figured out that having a finish on there is going to be a lot better than having it like this. So I'm going to go ahead and sand that up a little bit so that we can get the finish taken care of. And then as soon as we're done with the finish, then we'll move back over to this here. While I wait for it, I should probably do this. Take that off and then put it on top so it doesn't really cool off too much and doesn't heat up the handle for it, because this thing's starting to get warm already very quickly. The heat transfers fast. But let me go ahead and get that taken care of. Also, I'm running out of memory on this card on my camera, so I got to swap that out anyways. So let me go get everything together for this. Alright, so we're over at our spray area. Sorry about the noise. We've got a ventilation shaft right above us that makes some noise, and we've got this guy that I'm about to turn on. This is a spray booth that's charcoal filtration system. As you can see, we do like little test sprays here. We change out this filter, and then inside there are other filtration systems, and then up top there's a charcoal base that kind of filters it all. So this is what we use for our spray area. Now I ended up grabbing a chunk of the JR Sole to test out a few different options. I had a dark brown here on this corner. I had a medium, was it the medium brown? Yeah, medium brown right there, and doing some red there. So I was just kind of testing out a few ideas and thoughts and stuff, and I came down to the conclusion that the medium brown's turning out well. I did also try out the tan to see how that might work out. I was not happy with how the tan looked, so medium brown seemed to be the way to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab these. I did tape off certain areas since we're a little more concentrated in here instead of being able to spritz all around. We're strictly concentrated here. I didn't want any of the dye to spill over, or not spill over, any of the spray of the dye to spill over anywhere onto the upper, and then have to deal with cleaning that up later. I mean, we're still going to clean these and condition them. We're going to remove any finishes that they may have put on in the factory that's just not that great, in other words, but I still don't want to take any chances on the dye itself. What we're using is a discontinued Meltonian spray. This is Meltonian's out of business if you're familiar enough with shoe care products. Meltonian was one that was used for a very, very long time, but no longer is anymore, and we ended up getting a ton of cans from our local finders and just getting whatever we could from them because it's great stuff. I mean, for certain things. We used to years ago, a lot of cobblers even still do now, do like touch-up sprays with this, like certain areas. Worst case, if we have like a really cheap pair of shoes, like a low quality leather that's corrected grain, this comes in handy for that a lot of times. But a full grain leather, I really don't like using this for the top. But for the bottom stain aspect of it, works out beautifully, especially if we're trying to be a little more on the creative side. But let me go ahead and get this taken care of. Gotta shake it up well, spritz that. And so we're just touching up the edges here a little bit. And there we go, just like that. Okay, I'm gonna set that one aside to dry for a minute. Just like that, we're going to let that soak in and dry for a little bit, and then it's just a little bit, and then we're going to come back and grab our Saphir
Chapter Seraphin Cream, and use this here. This is the cherry red, number 89. We do also have the bright red, or just the regular red, number 11. This thing always turns out extremely bright. I don't like using this for a bottom stain, so we're not using that one. We're going to use the cherry here. Turns out a lot nicer looking. So give me a second to readjust the camera and everything, let you guys see it. I'm really hoping to try to get all the angles of this so everyone can see what it looks like. So let me run this back over to the table and go from there. Alright, so I thought instead of moving around back and forth, I'll let you see the mess back here. This is obviously where our little shine area is, or supposed to be. This used to be our old workbench at the other location there. A lot of you may have been familiar with. Still has a lot of glue and stuff on there. I really have to like go through and sand this. Luckily it's a stainless steel table, so a lot of that old glue and dye and stuff will be fairly easy to remove. It's just kind of time consuming, in other words. But at this point I'm gonna go ahead and grab just a regular rag, get our cream here, rub it in. Okay, now I can't let this dry too long because I have to buff it, so let me go ahead and transition to buffing this shoe. I'll do the other one off of camera because I have to do this a little bit quicker, so the waxes don't start to dry and the turpentine doesn't dry too or evaporate too quickly. So let me switch over to the buffer. Alright, so we're over at our buffer here. We've got horsehair brushes here. This one we like to use for this. We've been trying to figure out which brushes we're going to use on what type of stuff, but this one works out perfect for buffing things out like this. So let me go ahead and do that. Beautiful. So it's not too brown right here, just a little bit brown, so just keeps it a little bit on the darker side. It's better, in my opinion, it's always better to have the center more of that bright color and then the edges a little bit darker. I like to use black very often, but I was going to keep this a little bit lighter than just black because we're still going to have the black GTO here. We're going to have the combination heels, so we'll go ahead and leave it like that. I'm going to let this well, I can't let this dry too long. I have to finish out the other one quickly so that I can actually do the stamp on this. So let me go ahead and finish out the other one, and we'll move back to a table so we can do the stamp, let everything dry, and then we'll sand out these areas a little bit more here to get off some of the polish and dye that ended up getting onto the areas that we don't want it on, and of course take off the tape and everything. So let me get that taken care of and we'll see you back in just a little bit. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just did it on our heel wheel there, and so the logo turned out a little bit better on that one. Unfortunately it shifted on me a little bit and didn't turn out perfectly straight or anything, and it's driving me nuts. But sorry Simon, your shoes ended up being kind of abnormal test run, in other words, but it's just a little logo area there, so nothing too crazy. It's you know, just right there. So you know, the main aesthetics, I'm not happy with the logo, I'm sorry, but you know, there's only so much that you can do with it, because again, I had to do this after the sole was already placed on there. Usually we cut it out and everything and then place the logo on and press it down, but even that doesn't actually end up being perfectly centered. Sometimes it shifts around on us and everything, and I was hoping to see how well it would work with the burning. Well, turns out the burning doesn't work all that well. Maybe if we used a torch or something, but even so, I don't know how well that metal would hold up, considering that this S melted on me this much. I mean, that's a shame there. Oh well, maybe I'll send it to you, Simon. You could have a little S that goes with it, but I have another idea in mind for something else. I'm gonna test out the theory and see how well it works, but for now I gotta go ahead and sand out these areas there a little bit more, just rough it up a little bit, get some of that wax and finish off of there, and start gluing up the half-soled portion of everything.
Once that's all glued, then I'll cut out the area where the Triumph toe plate will be, and then we'll finally move on to the stitching aspect of everything. So let me go ahead and get that taken care of, and we'll be back here in just a... Alright, so I just pulled this out of the oven, so it's nice and toasty right now, and oh, sorry, I got like a sneeze coming up. Ugh, trying to stop that from happening. But anyways, the sole portion here we've already double glued and everything, and so we're ready to put this on. Rubber, of course, we only need to put a single coat of glue on there, and the reason why we do that obviously is because for the leather it tends to absorb that first layer, and so we need to make sure we put on 2 coats. So the first coat acts like a primer, and then the second coat is what actually really adheres everything nicely. I'll take the back end of my hammer and just kind of press out that area there and position it nicely wherever it needs to go. Okay. And the rest of it gets laid out like that. There we go. Coming along nicely. So now we're going to go ahead and put this on the press and let it sit there for just a little bit to allow everything to kind of press out any air pockets and bubbles, and then we'll let it sit and cure for a little while and trim off the edges. I'll do that on camera, at least the trimming, to let you check that out, and then I'll go through and kind of touch up any edging that I may need to. Well, actually, why am I thinking jumping the gun? I don't really need to touch up edges. I actually have to channel it, so I'll go ahead and do the channeling on that after I cut off all that excess here, and we'll get ready for some stitching. But I gotta let this cure for just a little while, so I'll be back in just a little bit after I do all that. Alright everyone, so because of how long this video might end up being, I'm gonna probably do a breakpoint here where we'll do a 2-part for the video. This is going to be part 1, how we ended up basically taking apart the shoe, getting the midsole on there, the leather JR sole, and putting on the rubber GTO crosshatch half sole. Next part, stay tuned for that. We're going to go ahead and channel this area here and start getting ready to stitch everything. Put on the heel base that we've been working on, the heel block, or wherever I ended up putting it. There it is. The heel block right there, like that. Measured everything out. Seems like everything's good on height. We just have to put it on and start fixing it up a bit. And then afterwards, we'll do the JR dovetail top lift heel. Sorry, I keep having sneezes wanting to come up. Allergies are kicking in pretty bad here. Yeah, so stay tuned for that video. I'm gonna probably go ahead and do it in 2-part. Let me know what you think of the 2-part system. Do you prefer it that way, so that you know, I could talk about more detail of what we are doing and everything, and that way it's not all one giant video all at once. I mean, these are going to be fairly long 2 parts anyways, most likely, just because there's a lot that we're doing to this one single pair of Allen Edmonds shoes, and we've got a lot to do to it as well still. So definitely make sure you hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and hit the little notification bell icon to be notified as soon as the second part to this video is going to be out. And I think we'll probably do 1 week on that video basically, so probably next week. Stay tuned for that, but you never know what might happen. Things do come up, you know, I'm not a robot, I am human after all, so sometimes certain plans or something may end up changing. But definitely make sure you hit that notification bell icon so that you're notified as soon as that second part comes out, because we'll also be sure to show how we're treating and taking care of these uppers on them and doing some touch-ups as well. But thank you for watching this first part. Hope you enjoyed it so far to this point, and we'll see you all next time on the next part for it.